Welcome to the third episode of Third Song In. Today we're going to be talking about sitcoms.
This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek.
And I'm going to start out with a not so funny story. So I work at Duke. I went to a Duke football game. They always do have these little things in between plays, and they did a song where people would jump up and dance on stuff. And it was Moving On Up. And there was an African American lady sitting next to me. And she's like, "Do you remember this song?" I'm like, "Yes, it's the Jeffersons. It was one of my favorite TV shows." And she said, "Mine too, but probably for different reasons, because it always reminds me what we had to put up with." And I was like, "Oh, that's a great point." I was like, "I just thought it was funny." But then actually I had a really nice conversation with her. She didn't say it in any sort of way. So, and I think that's what we hope to talk about a little bit about today, and that sitcoms, yes, some of them are really dumb and ideally funny, but sometimes they'll have some great topics that can be discussed in a not so serious way, but still get the point across. And it's not what I was expecting at the Duke game, but it's what I got.
It's funny because we're going to talk about a bunch of different lists and the greatest sitcoms ever, or at least touch on some of that stuff. And uh, it's really weird to look back at sitcoms from the 70s and how I don't know if the right word is groundbreaking, but how socially conscious they were, and also kind of blatantly how blatantly they captured just racism and sexism, and usually in the form of commentary. Not, I mean, to point out how bad it was, but the things that they would say on sitcoms back then, you couldn't say today, even if you have the same intention. I think even if creators want to point out how awful a person like Archie Bunker can be, and frankly, absolutely is right now, you can't have that Archie Bunker character, at least not in the same way or doing the same things. It's really interesting to me how it used to be a little bit more unvarnished, I guess.
Yeah, and it was always a big deal when there was a serious topic, and I'm not going to remember them all, but I remember we'd watch, because it's not like today where you stream them. You would generally watch them when they were on, and it was a big deal when they were in their first run, and everyone would go through new material for a season, and they'd often have like and they'd even advertise it's like, on a special episode of, Family Ties, they're going to talk about kids drinking or something, but whatever. But it was almost like it was a special thing, as I just said, whereas it ran through those earlier sitcoms all the time. Like there was always serious stuff that was interlaced into
Yeah.
them. Like you said, All in the Family. If you go back and watch that, I mean, it's funny, but it's a little uncomfortable watching it. But in a good way. I mean, like you said, that was the intent. It was to raise awareness. And it's not ironic isn't the word we're looking for, but Archie Bunker was purposefully a bad dude. And it was a risky move for, was it Carol? What was his name? Whatever, the
Carol
actor.
O'Connor.
Carol O'Connor, yeah. To play that role because he became associated with it. And but he was a fantastic actor and he really pulled that through. And there were other shows, like you said. Of course,
Well,
The
the
Jeffersons
Jeffersons.
was a spinoff,
Yeah.
yeah, and that took it to the next level. I
Remember
feel.
Good Times? Good Times with
Yep,
John
Good
Amos.
Times. Yep,
John Amos, who just passed away, by the way. I was really bummed
right.
out because I loved
I
him.
I did see that, and I didn't put that on my list, even though I could have, because it was one of those shows. Because to me, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I watched when I got home from school, and Good Times was definitely one of the ones that was on. And we'll talk about some others as we move forward. So.
Yeah, but those, they would always have a character. Well, not always, but they would have a character that was really comic relief. But Good Times was really about racism. It was really about a disparity between low income and middle income and what have you. All in the Family was such a social commentary on an episode by episode basis. You had the uh, uh, Rob Reiner and Gloria. No, Gloria was the
Gloria was
character's
the
name.
character's
Sally
name, yeah.
Struthers. Sally
Yes.
Struthers. But they were like the young hippie couple, and they were the ones who were there to point out how bad and how awful Archie Bunker's thinking was. But you're right, Carol O'Connor, he played that straight. Like he didn't, he had little catchphrases and things that would make people laugh, but he played it. He played a bigot, and he knew what he was doing when he did it. And then, like you said, in the '80s, you stopped getting that on a regular basis, and they would just they would do a very special episode. Like I remember Different Strokes did an episode that was about child sexual abuse. It was off. I can't even believe they did it in the way that they did it. That kind of unleashed a landslide of those very special episodes on different '80s sitcoms.
And I think the other part, we talked about racism. There's also, of course, sexism and the prescribed roles of men and women. I mean, Dingbat, his, what he would always call Edith. And, but she'd have great moments where she would subtly or not so subtly put him down, and we'd all cheer because, like you said, he played that role straight and all the comedy was around him and often laughing at him. And then the
Mm-hmm.
other one was you talked about it, and I didn't really think about it, but even as a young kid, I remember something sinking in about good times and how they lived because it was definitely a small apartment. They didn't have money, like not being able to afford things was laced through the show. And I was a suburban kid. I wasn't rich, but I definitely noticed that. So that sort of stuff subtly gets into your head if you let it. And that was the beauty, I think, of some of those, you used the word groundbreaking sitcoms, going back. I think, there were certainly others. I just didn't watch them, but All in the Family is one of the ones that I distinctly remember.
Well, it's
And
funny. The ones we've been talking about were all created by Norman Lear, also.
I know, yeah.
And Good Times was a spinoff of The Jeffersons, if I'm not mistaken. And The Jeffersons was a spinoff of All in the Family. I mean, obviously he was the driving force behind that, and not necessarily all sitcoms were willing to do those things, but he certainly changed the face of it, I think, to the extent that other shows were willing to do some stuff that maybe they weren't doing certainly weren't doing in the '60s when I mean, if you look at the all-time list of sitcoms, which I did before this episode, that you get your I Love Lucy's, you get the Honeymooners, you get those shows, and they were funny in their own way, but they certainly didn't. I think Norman Lear changed the face of all of that in the '70s.
And for me, a lot of the sitcoms, as I already said, were, what I watched when I came home. So this isn't in order, but some of the ones that stood out, I don't know why, it was like, I thought it was funny. But Gilligan's Island
Yes.
was one that was on all the time. As soon as that little theme song started up, I was all excited.
It
Laverne and Shirley, I mentioned, which was a spinoff, I think, of Happy Days. And
was.
Happy Days, I remember watching in its first run, like the 7, 8 o'clock slot or whatever time it was. Laverne and Shirley, I definitely remember watching a little bit more in reruns for whatever reason. And that theme song as well. I mean, that's the other part is it seems like you had to have a catchy theme song to make it work because Laverne and Shirley, Shamil, Shamazo, Hop and Skip Incorporated, whatever it was. That's
Yeah.
my
Well,
last,
and it
that's
was
the last
always
time I'm going to sing.
but it was also, it was a full song. It was like a 2-minute song before every sitcom. And that goes to show you. And also there was less advertising, right? There were fewer commercials, so they had more time. Now you're lucky if you get like a card with the name of the show that come on, or like 2 bars of some kind of music. But I remember one of my favorites and one of the ones I used to watch that was in syndication, same thing after school, was Welcome Back, Kotter. And that was like a full 3-minute pop song that played at the beginning of every episode. I mean, they played that on the radio. It was on the radio. Like I bet you it was a top 10 song for a while.
And that, of course, gave us John Travolta.
Yes, yes. Welcome Back, Kotter was eventually responsible for Pulp Fiction.
There you go. And I guess a lot of these others, I think we've talked about it before. So these are sort of moments in time, and it's funny how sitcoms sort of mark them in some ways for me. And the other one was the Cosby Show, or the Bill Cosby. I forget what I think it was called, the Cosby Show. right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The one where he was the dad, the
Yeah,
doctor, right?
Heathcliff or
Yeah.
Doctor, whatever. Yep. And I don't remember the show as well, but it does show very different in how they portray. Like if you compare Good Times to the Cosby Show, middle age, if not in the middle age, middle class, if not upper middle class, because he's a doctor. They certainly dealt with racism, but not in the same way. I think it was trying to make clear a little bit more of the similarities, which of course is important too, but still the differences. And I mean, that's of course tainted now by what's going on with Bill Cosby. But that was a show that when it came on in that first run, 8 o'clock, probably Thursday nights, because Thursday night was always a big night, our fraternity house would gather in the TV room and I mean, it would be packed for that. And we would all
Yep.
watch it and talk about it. And I mean, it was a great show.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think obviously it was a big part of the cultural fabric at that time. And again, in an age before internet, it wasn't, people didn't get to kind of personalize their entertainment the way that we can now. So, everybody taught that's, there were water cooler shows and Cosby was definitely one of those that everybody would talk about the next day and everybody would tune in on the night that it came out. I looked at Rolling Stone's top 10 list of sitcoms, and I thought it was kind of interesting because it's one of those lists that I don't think you can really argue with, but I don't agree with it. So, and I'll just run through it real quick. 10 was Larry Sanders Show. We've talked about the Larry Sanders Show in the past. I don't think you've watched that. I have, but not till long after it had stopped airing, in its original form. I think I have the DVD box set or something like that. Parks and Recreation was number 9. The Honeymooners was 8. The Mary Tyler Moore Show was 7. MASH was 6. All in the Family 5. I Love Lucy 4. Seinfeld 3. Cheers 2. And The Simpsons 1. And one of the things that at least for my purposes, even though I absolutely love the show, I don't consider The Simpsons a sitcom, and it's purely because it's animated. And I think it's just because you can do so much with animation that you can't do in live action, that it doesn't seem fair to compare The Simpsons. It's also not fair to compare them because they probably had, over the term of the life of that show, they've had the best comedy writers on the planet on a regular basis. But so I don't have The Simpsons on my personal list, but I certainly understand it's definitely like the classic sitcom setup, right? It's all in the family except different.
And of that list, I've not watched Larry Sanders, only watched an episode or two of Parks and Rec. Same with Honeymooners. I don't know. It was just a little, those just didn't connect. Those, I don't know. I know they're black and white and live action, and it was a little over the top, I felt. I know I already used the word groundbreaking, but it was an influential one that
For
inspired
sure.
others. I just didn't watch it. But the Mary Tyler Moore Show is one that I did watch, and I sort of group it with others. I don't know if it's fair or not, but I don't know if it was the Bob Newhart show at the time.
Yep.
So that was one that was on at the same time. Oh, shoot. But Mary Tyler Moore, I think I probably missed a lot of the jokes. I mean, not missed, but they're probably a little above me at times. There's probably stuff if I went back and watched it. Because I remember my favorite was Ted Knight. Ted Knight's
Yes.
character was so funny. But he was more the comedic relief. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of stuff about women in the workplace that I probably didn't pay as much attention to as I should have. But it was a fun show to watch. And I always remember the opening where she throws her hat in the air.
Yep. Yep. And again, a full on 2.5 minute theme
Exactly.
song.
And MASH, I enjoyed watching. I don't know why, but it never really stuck with me as much as I think it did with you.
Yeah.
And a lot of this was I was younger and it may have depended on what my family was watching. We just didn't, my parents didn't get into MASH, and I guess I didn't, and it just probably didn't line up with what reruns or, syndicated shows were running when I'd come home from school.
Yeah, MASH is funny because it's funny. I'm looking at my own. I wrote down a personal top 5 list just to have something to talk about. And weirdly, I didn't put MASH on there, and I should have the more I think about it, because that show was a huge part of my pop culture life when I was in grade school through junior high, probably. And it is one of those shows. It was one of the few shows. There were two shows that my parents let us stay up past 9 o'clock Eastern time to watch before we had to go to bed when I was like in fifth or sixth grade. Like we had to go to bed at 9 all the way up until I was probably in seventh or eighth grade. 9 o'clock was bedtime, and the only time we were allowed to stay up till 9:30 to watch MASH once a week and to watch Barney Miller once a week. And those two shows were just a huge part of my life for that reason, maybe only that reason, because it was like a little bit of freedom and a little bit of maturity that my parents let me feel that I had. But I've seen every episode of MASH. I've probably seen every episode of MASH 3 or 4 times. And I talked in a previous episode, the finale of that show literally had me feel like I had lost a family member when because it was very clearly a finale. It was an hour-long finale, I think, at the time, and for a long time after, it was the most watched television show in history. I'm not sure that's still the case, but it ended, and I felt like a beloved uncle had died or something like that. It was really a weird feeling for TV to affect me.
And that's what happened with me with Cheers. I remember, and we knew the finale was coming. I watched that one in its first run. I watched it same with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I've probably seen every episode 3 or 4 times. I don't watch it as much anymore. I mean, I'm sure I would still get a kick out of it. Friends is another one that is on all the time, even now, like when you turn on TV, regular TV, it's just there. And I didn't watch it as much. I think I'm guessing it was the popularity thing. I mean, it was super popular when we were in college, I think, and I just didn't get into it. And now I've really only sort of caught up in syndication. But I'm looking at other shows here, some that I forgot about, like Alice,
Yeah.
the Diner, and Flow and all that. I remember, Kiss My Grits, I think. You get these catchphrases, and that was the thing, is they'd have to have that character that make you remember something about the show. And then the Odd Couple, and I never really got into that one. I think I found the uptight guy, the guy that's you, like.
What? What now? Son of a bitch. I'm not Felix. You're Felix. You're definitely not Felix.
No,
We
not
we might
Felix.
both be Oscar, but we are certainly you are not Felix. If one of us has to be Felix, I guess it has to be.
Yeah, if somebody has to be, it's you. But I never really liked him. He was a little too much for me.
Yeah, I think that was the idea.
It was. And then I guess the one that I have on my list that you don't. So I did the same thing as you did. I came up with the top five. Well, there's a couple I'd have, but WKRP in Cincinnati, for whatever reason, probably because I grew up in Cincinnati, but that was always one of my favorite shows. It would probably be more my favorite show, but it was never really in syndication because there was fights over the songs that were used.
Yeah.
So like they never put it out in a DVD collection. So I think that's all been settled and it's starting to get back in on reruns, but it just struck me. I loved it. And there were serious episodes, like there was not a reenactment, they had an episode that was centered around the Who concert in Cincinnati, where there were so they weren't audience members yet, where attendees were trampled and several were killed. It was a really, really bad and big deal in Cincinnati when it happened, and I remember that episode. Then, of course, I remember the episode where they dropped frozen turkeys from the
Yes.
helicopter.
Class. But WKRP was the first. I want to say it was the first workplace sitcom that I thought was hilarious. And to me, sitcoms, there's all kinds of different subcategories, but the workplace sitcom is my favorite. And my top five list contains mainly those kinds of sitcoms that are set in a specific place where it's not family, but they're together every day, so it basically becomes family. But I always like those better than the All in the Families or the Good Times or even the Cosby's. The Cosby Show doesn't make my top five list, and I think that's part of what it is. I like this idea of people getting thrown together and then having to deal with each other. And WKRP was definitely that kind of show, and probably one of the first ones because that was what, early '70s that it started, I think. Probably middle to late '70s
Yeah, probably. But of course,
that it
we didn't do
started.
research, so. Why don't you talk about Taxi? Because I think I know I watched Taxi a lot. That's on your list. It's not on mine.
Yeah.
And that was I know that one I liked a lot. It's another one that I think you're a little bit more of a fan than I am.
Yeah, again, workplace comedy, definitely this group of disparate personalities thrown together. None of them wants to be there. They all have hopes and dreams, with the exception, I guess, of Alex, the lead character, who has just decided it is his lot in life. He's more or less satisfied with being the guy who drives a cab, but everybody else has other plans. Like with most sitcoms, I think it just comes down to casting. And if you get the right people who work well together, then you're going to have a funny show. And that is the perfect example of that, because that cast was awesome and they were so funny together and they played so well off of each other. Danny DeVito, as the dispatcher, who just, constantly harangued and harassed everybody there. He was the comic relief guy. Well, one of them. There was also Latka. What's the comedian? Andy Kaufman. Oh my God. They just threw this crazy group of kind of more traditional actors. Some of them felt like they had come to this sitcom from a dramatic background. That's how I felt about Judd Hirsch, who played Alex. But then you had these just hilarious, hilarious people like Danny DeVito and Andy Kaufman. And it was one of those, I don't remember the years that it ran, and I didn't write down years for any of these shows, but it's kind of in that same time period, uh, right, or just post MASH, or at the same time maybe as I can't remember. But it really it was the casting and the ensemble work that they did. Just I just love that show. I just think it's hilarious. And I actually watched a few episodes not too long ago. I showed it to my kids, to the boys, just to see what they thought. And they didn't think anything of it. Too slow, like just about every show from the 70s and 80s for them. But I watched maybe 3 or 4 episodes total, like the first 3 or 4 episodes, and they held up pretty well, actually. Pretty good. It's a lot of social commentary, but done in a very, very funny way. And I put that in my top five list. And I don't think it was probably maybe top 15 or 20 in the Rolling Stone list, if I remember.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we each do a quick run through of our top five? And then I think it's time to transition to our newer segment where we make a recommendation from a specific year in the 80s. So
Okay,
my
all right.
my top five, WKRP in Cincinnati, I talked about that already. News Radio, I've actually talked about that on a previous episode. Phil Hartman. And you talk about a great ensemble cast. That's it. It
Yes.
was a really good show. Scrubs, which I may let you talk a little bit more about. The only problem with Scrubs is they've now ruined it with these stupid uh, TV ads that those two are doing together. I think it's a telephone. I don't even know what it is, but Cheers and then Happy Endings, which I've also talked about in another one. And I got you to watch most, if not all, those shows.
Yeah, I'm going to comment on yours real quick. First of all, just this morning I saw a post, and I think a lot of these are just clickbait, but there's at least some story out there that they may reboot Scrubs with some of the original cast.
Oh, cool.
Now, I'm a little worried about that, because I don't know if you watched all of the seasons of Scrubs, but the very final season of Scrubs was horrible. They introduced an entirely new cast, and a couple of the old cast would kind of come in and out. And if they're going to do that again, I probably won't watch it. But the original show, I will talk about it in a bit. I just wanted to talk about Happy Endings, because I watched that whole series, which was only 2 seasons,
Three, maybe.
three
Maybe two or
seasons,
three.
maybe.
It was short.
But I ended up watching all. I kind of just binged it over a couple of weeks period of time. My family was like, "What the fuck are you doing? Why are you watching this show?" And my daughter sat down and watched a couple episodes with me, and she was comparing it to The New Girl, and there was some cast
Yeah.
overlap of those two shows. And she very much did not like Happy Endings and thought New Girl was much better, by the way. But I thought it was good. It wouldn't be in my top five list, or probably even my top 10 list, but I thought it was, because of the cast and because they worked really well together. I think they had a really good rapport. It was pretty funny. My top five list, I don't think it's necessarily in order, because I keep changing my mind, but Scrubs is one of my all-time favorite sitcoms. Brooklyn Nine-Nine is on my list. I think that show is underrated. Taxi, we talked about, Seinfeld, and Cheers. Those are the five. Did I say five? I would say those are my favorite to watch. MASH probably has a more important role in my pop culture life and probably means more to me from a sentimental perspective. But just as far as the overall product, I think those are just three awesome shows. And again, it comes down to having a really funny cast who works really well together as an ensemble. Scrubs turned the sitcom formula a little bit on its head. It did things very differently. Um, Lots of quick cuts, lots of weird, surreal dream sequences, music. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. Brooklyn Nine-Nine and the rest of them are more traditional sitcoms, but just it all comes down to the writing and the actors, and those have the best of both, in my opinion. I did have some honorable mentions. One I thought was really cool is The Good Place. Again, talked about that probably a couple seasons ago. It's not your traditional sitcom anyway. It is a comedy, I guess, but it was very they deconstructed what a sitcom was, had a really good cast, but because of the kind of supernatural, mystical, religious ramifications to that show, I just thought it kind of deserves its own category, and I thought that was worth talking about too.
And I would probably put Seinfeld in my real top five, but you had already made your list, and I didn't want to duplicate it completely. So I threw happy endings to mainly let you show how much of an influence I have on you with my
You
great recommendations.
absolutely. I listen to what music you recommend. I watch shows that you recommend. I've read books you've recommended. How many of those things have you read or seen or listened to that I've recommended?
Well, let me see.
Fuck
There's
you. You're like
hold
my
on,
kids.
I'm still counting. Hold on. One. Wait, there's zero. There's none of them.
Yeah. I clearly have a huge influence on everyone close to me.
All right, let's go to our recommendations. These that we've replaced or riffed off of our old then and now. And for season five, we are going to have a recommendation from a specific year in the 1980s. So episode one was 1981, episode two, 1982. And of course, this is three. So by that logic, it could be 1983. So I'll go ahead and go with my recommendation because I've already mentioned it in my incredibly important cold open. I'm going with the Jeffersons, and I actually don't want to talk so much about the show because I already mentioned, I mean, it was very important, groundbreaking, Norman Lear. We've already talked about that. But what I found interesting is I went back and I looked at the top rated shows from 1982, 1983, 1983, 1984. And 82, 83, which was when I think Jefferson's was may have peaked at number 12. If you look at the top 10, you have Three's Company, The Love Boat, which was kind of a comedy, I guess, and The Jeffersons and Newhart, 9 to 5, One Day at a Time. So you got a decent number of sitcoms filling up the top 20. Just 1 year later, almost all of those shows it's the top 10 is Dallas, Dynasty, Magnum PI, Falcon Crest, Kate and Alley, Cagney and Lacey, Knots Landing. I mean, it's all those 1 hour
Yeah.
terrible
Well,
like
yeah, four or five of
the
them.
comedies are gone.
Yeah, four or five of those were just the primetime soap operas, right? I
Yeah,
mean, that was
exactly.
what
Yeah,
everybody was.
Dallas.
I never
And
watched any of those shows.
the first sitcom that I see, and I'd be curious your thoughts, was After MASH, which I guess was the attempt to, I don't even remember that one, to be truthful.
I think it was only out for like, I'm surprised it was that highly ranked, or for that year. I assume it's by by viewers. It was Jamie Farr, the guy who played Father Mulcahy, and the guy who played Colonel Potter. I think that was it. I don't think Radar was in it. I think it was those three guys. So three, as far as I'm concerned, very secondary characters from MASH. Nobody else wanted to be involved, obviously, and they I thought it was only on for one season, and it may have. We should probably look it up. I remember watching it because I was so attached to the show MASH, and it was not good. It was kind of stupid, and I don't think it lasted very long at all, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it looks like it went 2 years.
Yeah, that
There's a
that
long
sounded.
description on Wikipedia of season one and a very short one of season two. So I wouldn't be surprised if it got canceled in the
Like,
middle.
yeah, so maybe Gary Berghoff was in it. Doesn't look like it to me though. I'm looking at it was Klinger, Father Mulcahy, and Colonel Potter,
Hmm.
who were great secondary characters in MASH and clearly not capable of carrying their own half-hour sitcom.
It really just struck me that there's a pretty even split of those drama shows and sitcoms in 82, 83. And then just 1 year later, I mean, the only ones that I'm seeing that register as sitcoms, you have Alice all the way down in 25, The Facts of Life, which remember that one, Newhart, and The Jeffersons. And Jeffersons, I think, is the highest rated. Well, I guess if you count After MASH as a sitcom, but everything else is those 1 hour either dramas or cop shows. And then
Yeah.
even the like Sunday night movies, which I remember those were a series that they would have regular TV, made for TV movies. Those are higher rated than the sitcoms. So
Hmm.
I'm sure there's something to that we could talk about it. But it's not like one of us is a history major or anything. So why would we
No, or
focus on that stuff?
or even both of us as far as that goes. So my recommendation from 1983 is not a TV show because we've spent a lot of time talking about TV shows, but it's connected in my head anyway. And I'm recommending the album Cargo by Men at Work, which came out in 1983. It was their follow-up album to Business as Usual. And Business as Usual was enormous. It just exploded in the US. And I think it was a year or two after it had already been released in definitely in Australia, but also like in Europe, and it had been big there. And then it got released in the US. And, at any given time, there'd be like 5 or 6 songs from Business as Usual on the radio. Like I think at least 3 or 4 songs made number one on the charts. Cargo is their follow up, and most critics agree, and I agree, that is actually a better overall album. From start to finish, the songs were just kind of better across the board. And also, I think a couple of them hit at least the top 10. It is definitely an example of an 80s new wave pop. And they were a fun band to listen to, but the main reason I want to recommend them is because their leader, the songwriters, the lead singer, his name is Colin Hay. He still performs now, but he performs solo. I think he had an album come out in 2023. I think he's still very, very good, but I loved his lyrics. I think he's really smart. The reason that I wanted to recommend him though is because I think he's connected to sitcoms by way of the show Scrubs. He appeared on Scrubs 4 different times. He would play music, and it was usually Men at Work music. He played songs from either Cargo or from Business as Usual, but he would just he would he would generally be part of JD's imagination. He'd be one of those crazy dream sequences, and he'd be walking down the hallways of the hospital in a hospital gown playing an acoustic guitar. And they were just very, very cool versions of those Men at Work songs. So I was thinking about Scrubs, which made me think of those episodes and Colin Hayes guest starring, and it then made me think of Cargo, which is probably my favorite Men at Work album. So my 1983 recommendation is go back and listen to Cargo by Men.
Nice. Thank you. I will add that to my list of things that I won't listen to that you recommend.
Yeah, fuck off, Chris. Just fuck off.
All right.
That takes us to our next segment, another new one we call Unknown Unknowns. We're going to recommend one at a time, either music or movies, books, TV, whatever it may be that we feel has been that is relatively unknown, that deserves more exposure than it's gotten. My recommendation, we're going to take turns on this. So my recommendation for this episode is the artist, the musician, C.C. Adcock, and his album, C.C. Adcock, which came out in 1994. I'm sorry, he had an album that came out in 1994. What I'm actually recommending though is an album that came out in 2004 called Lafayette Marquis, and he's a New Orleans performer. If you read descriptions of what he writes, I'll quote Wikipedia, which says he's an American singer, songwriter, guitarist, and blues rock musician, noted for his Cajun, Zydeco, electric blues, and swamp pop influenced sound. I've been listening to Lafayette Marquis since the mid 2000s. I don't remember where I first heard him. It might have been at Jazz Fest. It might have been from a club in New Orleans when I was down there for Jazz Fest. I do know that a song of his is on the soundtrack for one of the seasons of the show Treme. So that may be how it jumped into my consciousness, but I can tell you that it is a great album. It is, he's got that New Orleans kind of funky sound, and he does really mash together all those different genres of music, Cajun and Zydeco, but also blues and rock. And he's got a really cool voice, and I think you should listen to CC Adcock and look for the album Lafayette Marquis, which came out in 2004.
Yeah, you put some of his stuff on our playlists. I recognize the name. And again, this isn't comparing. This is reiterating that he is not well known, because on YouTube Music he has all of 210 followers,
Yeah.
which is not a lot. I mean, if you compare to someone like I don't know, Zach Bryan, I'm sure he has. In fact, I can tell you, one second.
Yeah, I would assume millions.
Zach has just a scant 1.3 million subscribers.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so, and I'm not even sure. So CC Adcock, I don't think performs solo, or at least doesn't record solo very much these days. He's also been involved in scoring, I think, TV and movies. He's been there's some kind of New Orleans super group that he's involved in as well, that I think he tours around and plays with. But I think we got two really good albums out of him, and that may be all we ever get. But they deserve to be listened to. Up next is Post Facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Post Facto is our opportunity to correct mistakes if we've had any. It also allows us to comment or supplement information we may have given in earlier episodes. Sometimes it's a reaction to comments or questions we've had from our listening audience. For this week's Post Facto, I really don't have anything to correct. And I thought I might want to give you some kudos. We were talking about how I listen to stuff that you recommend. And something you recommended earlier, actually was in the season premiere, was an artist named Grady Spencer. And I listened to Grady Spencer, and he's pretty fucking good, Chris. I think it was a great recommendation.
I feel like I should listen to some of your stuff, so I might be able to compliment you.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath.
It'll happen one of these days.
One of these days. What I really thought was interesting, though, is I looked him up on iTunes, and you recommended Grady Spencer and The Work. So that's him and his backing band, I guess. He also performs as Grady Spencer, and I found also Grady Spencer and what was the other one? Grady Spencer. God damn it.
Grady Spencer and the Griswolds.
Yes. And I think there was even another band. Like, I think he just kind of, goes around
the Vagabonds and Grady Spencer and The Work. So he's got a group that has two ampersands in it.
Yes, yes. I didn't listen to all of that stuff, but the stuff I did listen to was very good. He's right up my alley. I see why you recommended him, and I felt for Post Facto that was worth commenting on.
Is the Griswolds, is that how the Vacation family spelled their name? I assume that's what the reference is.
Except no, because isn't that Griswolds is with the U, right? Griswold.
Yeah, this is with the U, which is strange spelling.
The Griswolds in the Vacation movies is with an O, Griswolds. So I don't know what the reference is to, but I feel like if he sees somebody holding an instrument, he's like, "Hey, you want to play? We'll release a single, and it'll be me and what are you called? Griswolds? Got it." Next up is Staff Picks. Just around the corner from you. is there anything new you want to tell the listeners about?
I do. And just to remind folks, staff picks do not necessarily have to align with the topic for the podcast, the episode. This is stuff that has been released pretty recently. And I do. I have a new artist that I have not discovered, but I now know about. And I found out through another artist I listened to. So Rustin Kelly, I've mentioned before, and I'm sure I've put his stuff on playlists and recommendations. He is one of my favorites going right now. He recorded a duet with the singer named Katie Pruitt. Katie Pruitt's a country singer out of Nashville. Fantastic voice. The song that they recorded together, which is going to be my staff pick for this week, is called Stand Still. And it's a beautiful song about relationships possibly going wrong. And one of the lines from it is a little bit of a twist on words, is when you're at a standstill, you just need to stand still and just figure it. So that's where the song comes from. Why I recommend it is for two reasons. I really like how Rustin Kelly makes, or whoever decided to make, his voice very complimentary in this. Like Katie Pruitt's voice is easily the standout, and Rustin Kelly at no point feels like he's competing with her, or it's just a perfect compliment to her voice. His voice very much takes the background, which I think is a really nice sign of respect for how strong her voice is. That's one reason I like the song, is just how they recorded it together. The second is it led me to her 2024 album called Mantras, Mantras. It's a great album. I've listened to it twice all the way through just in the last 2 days. And Tom, you and I have talked about this. We don't listen to albums that way as much anymore. And I'm going to go back and listen to her other stuff. And I think we decided we might talk about this at a future point, but Katie Pruitt is very openly and wears her sexual identity on her sleeve. She's gay, and there's a song that I really like called "Jealous of the Boys," which talks about, her dealing with this through high school and otherwise, where she wishes basically that she was a boy. She's jealous of what guys can do that sometimes girls can't. She talks about having crushes on her friends in high school and feeling bad that they put up with all the crap that they did from their boyfriends, and she would have never done that to them. But there's something about it that is very introspective, even though it's very explicit in her feelings for it. And that appeals to me quite a bit. And the other one is, and I've read several articles on her. When I get into someone, I get into them big, and we're talking about how her songwriting's evolving. A lot of her stuff has been very negative, not negative, just dealing with the fact that she often expects the worst out of people. And this album is starting to move in a little bit more of a positive direction, but she does talk a lot about politics and religion and sexual identity. And a second song that I would recommend, it's not my staff pick. Just from the title, you'll be able to tell that it's a little religious. It's White Lies, White Jesus, and You. And the refrain is basically things that I've left behind, which are white lies, white Jesus, and you. And there's a lot of religious hypocrisy in there, especially as it deals with homosexuality and sexual identity. But again, it's something, and not that it can't be, but it's something that's not in your face. It's just, I used the word introspective once, but you listen to it, and it's made me think. And as I said, I'll probably listen. I've already listened twice to her album through. I'll probably listen to it a few more times. I really, really like her. And that's my staff pick.
My staff pick, which you won't listen to, is an album that came out on September 20th of this year. It's called Still the River by Edward David Anderson. I was trying to write down my description of what his music is. And what I wrote was he's a proudly Midwestern country folk artist. He was the member of a band that plays a ton, or did play a ton, in this area. I think they still, frankly, are together. He just also does a lot of solo work. But the band was called Backyard Tire Fire, which is, I think, a great name for a band. They're from the Midwest, I think, from Illinois, although I got on his site and I can't find the specific. Oh, it does say revered Illinois band. So I'm going to say he's from Illinois, probably Central Illinois. He is got a very interesting voice, he's a great lyricist. He plays a bunch of different instruments. It's a very country folk sounding type of music that he has. To me, this album reminds me a lot of 70s era folk performers, guys like Harry Chapin, James Taylor, a lot of like the very best of John Denver. You know, John Denver can sometimes be the butt, you know, he's kind of a joke sometimes, but if you go back and listen to his work, he was really good, but he had that kind of 70s, I hate to say it, but kind of an easy listening vibe. That's what I get out of Still the River. He himself is that classic troubadour. He's always on the road, always singing in tiny little bars. He plays at the local place here in Joliet probably 3 or 4 times a year, and I try to see him at least one of those times. Got a little bit of a gravelly voice, which I think you would like, Chris. He's got quite a bit of output because he plays for a couple different bands, and I know he has at least 3 or 4 solo albums, but the newest one is Still the River, and it got a really good review in No Depression actually recently, which I was happy to see because I thought he was maybe a little more local than that. But I think maybe people are starting to hear him and he's starting to get out there a little bit. So look for Edward David Anderson. That album is streaming pretty much everywhere.
Well, now I feel bad because I'm actually going to have to go listen to him because
Mhm.
I know Backyard Tire Fire. I like them. And it's interesting. I just did a quick look up. I went and subscribed to Backyard Tire Fire because it's a band that I'd forgotten about. So I'll be listening to
Mhm.
them again and to this album. But slight correction, but it's funny how it ties into some things we've talked about. So they're originally from Asheville, North Carolina. So they're from out here.
Oh, really?
It's okay. You're good. And then they moved to Athens, Georgia for a little
Huh.
while, which we've talked about. And then they did move to Bloomington, Illinois. I think that was Bloomington. And some of the family members are from St. Charles, Illinois, which I hope some of those places mean something to you.
Yeah, St. Charles is kind of northwest suburbs. It's not too far from where I live. Yeah, you know, it's funny because his own bio doesn't make reference to anything other than Illinois. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that where is it? I saw this just a second ago. Here he goes. The description from his own website says that he defines his sound as black dirt music. So
Nice.
it goes along with red dirt music. He says black dirt music is songs about people and places, about life and love and loss. It's roots music cultivated in the fertile soil of the Midwest. And he does feel like a Midwestern folk guy, like I said. But it's interesting how you're right, how there's a line that runs from all those places.
I'm looking at black dirt music because if there is such a thing, I'm all over it.
Yeah, and apparently there's a Black Dirt Music Festival that started in 2019. They headlined the inaugural Backyard Tire Fire headlined the inaugural Black Dirt Music Festival. Backyard Tire Fire plays here in Joliet probably a half a dozen times a year. They were one of the first bands. If you recall, when we were talking about music festivals way back when, there was a festival a buddy of mine had started and promoted called Hopstream Fest, and Backyard Tire Fire played every one of those.
Thought I'd post that in the chat.
Yeah.
Pretty funny. It's all created by him. Black dirt. There is a black dirt music genre, and it says it lines up with a record label, talent agency, all created by him and Kim Anderson. I don't know if that's his spouse or.
Yeah, I'm guessing that is. Yeah, that's interesting. Cool.
That was good. I actually am going to listen to something that you recommended.
Yeah, we'll see.
That could change.
Report back.
That could change everything.
Report back on our next post facto. Then I'll believe
All right.
it.
All right.
It is time for playlist picks. We've created a companion music playlist for this and every season of Third Song In, and it is time for us to add to the list for season 5. I'm going to go first. I'm stuck on Scrubs for this episode. I am recommending Overkill, which is the acoustic version of a Men at Work song performed solo by Colin Hay in an album called Man at Work from 2003. It is one of the songs that he played walking around the hospital in a hospital gown in the television series Scrubs. It is a fucking great acoustic version of what I thought was a great, 80s pop song, and I'm proud to have this go on the playlist for season 5.
Well, I'm glad you're proud because I struggled mightily with this one, and I settled on something that's more ironic than it is proud. So uh, I'm going with a band that I've listened to a little bit. I wouldn't say they're one of my favorites, but it's Reliant K, which is a punk band. They're pretty solid. I do like them, but they recorded the Charles in Charge theme, and
Nice.
so it starts out a little music TV-ish, and then it goes into punk. So I will not so proudly put that on our playlist, but it definitely lines up. It's easily, I said this in a previous episode, I picked it as a response to a question from Jonathan as the worst TV show, one of the worst TV shows that I'd seen, and I stand by that. But this song's pretty catchy. So
Cool.
if you do want to take a listen to Charles in Charge, all of our playlists are on the various streaming services: YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Apple Music, and of course, Spotify. You can do a search for Third Song In, and then the various seasons. This will be season 5, and this is the third set of songs for that growing playlist.
Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com. We would ask that wherever you listen to our podcast, please follow us, download us, rate and review us, give us all of the stars. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music.
You can also find direct links to our podcasts and our blogs, which we do every week, on thirdsonginpodcast.com, which is our website. And we continue to update that weekly. Even when we're not recording, we're putting out blogs, pictures, and otherwise. So we'd strongly encourage you to check it out. Thirdsonginpodcast.com.
We also have a Facebook page. You can communicate with us via Facebook.
You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening.
No, he doesn't get to do it. Hold on. I can do it. I swear to God, I can do it. You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening. Jesus Christ.
Walker, you didn't think mine was good enough?
Exactly.
I noticed yesterday that we have 2 people subscribed to the podcast, or not the blog email. You
Really?
and somebody else.
Oh, I assumed it was you and me.
No, actually, it's going to be me, but I didn't do it yet.
Yeah, fuck off, Chris. Just fuck off.